Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leftridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
Your Last Bazaar by Derek Leftridge. In addition to the humming of the tires on the pavement of the highway and the slight breezes coming in through the car window, Kathy begins to have memories of growing up in this area. This stretch of highway is very rural and has a sparse amount of rest stops, just like many highways in this Southern Carolina town, which is similar to the town she grew up in. Most of the roads are two-lane blacktop with maple trees lining the sides of the road, separating acres of land from the interstate. At some points, the trees stretch across the road, forming a golden leafy tunnel, with a definite change in temperature since the sunlight becomes shaded briefly in these spots. It is completely different than the large metropolis she and her husband live in now, and that is a little over 2 hours behind her, and she has spent most of her time driving, thinking about growing up as a young girl. Kathy was adopted and had a great life growing up. There were a couple of times she tried to contact her real mother, but those attempts did not produce much. Her adoptive parents and brother were the greatest, and Kathy loved them in her life. 3 years ago, she got married, and her great life continued because of her wonderful husband, Joseph. Up to this point, everything for Kathy has made sense and has been enjoyable. Kathy, being a woman in her early 30s with her own business and her husband, a successful financial advisor, had no complaints. And she has a little secret to tell her husband when he returns from his business trip. Her mind wanders as she rubs the stomach area of her favorite blue-green shirt she is wearing. She has been told that this color looks great with her type of eye color and wonders how her husband will respond when she tells him she might be pregnant. Kathy is ready to be at the end of this long journey. Early this morning, she set out for a destination written to her from the grave. Her biological mother had a package sent to her the day she died. Kathy received it late last week. It was exciting and creepy at the same time. She shared the package and its contents with her husband, and he also thought it was creepy. In the package were 3 things, which were a letter to Kathy from her real mother, an old skeleton key, and an old wedding ring. The letter, written in what she assumes is her mother's handwriting, has detailed what she needs to do. Kathy is to take the key and ring to the Last Bazaar antique shop on Lincoln Street in the town of Asdale, which is located 55 miles from her home. While at the antique shop, Kathy is to see a Miss Carvad. Supposedly, Miss Carvad will explain everything to Kathy, along with the key and ring and their significance, along with why Kathy had to come to that certain location. However, the strange thing to Kathy and her husband, Joseph, was at the end of the letter, where her mother wrote, "Be sure you get there around 11:15 a.m., and please, my little cat, do not be mad at us." That last statement caused her husband to announce he was going to go with her. He wanted to protect her, but Kathy argued that idea because she did not think that was needed, and Joseph had to leave for his trip early in the morning for a very important count. She promised to keep in touch with him by the Find My Friends app, and just in case, he told her to take the 45 he bought and taught her how to use last summer. While on the adventure, Kathy pulls off South Interstate 77 onto exit 247C to Asdale. At the top of the off-ramp, the sign points to the left back across Interstate 77 to Asdale 1 mile away. As the light changes, Kathy makes her turn and sees the road is at the crest of a large hill that goes down into the town. As she descends the road, she sees that it splits the town right down the middle. As she gets closer, she sees businesses on both sides of the main road, and behind the businesses on the right side are subdivisions and homes littering the land. To the left are thick woods hiding the town from the highway. This town and its buildings look as if it was dropped from the sky and just don't seem to fit in this day and age. As she begins down the main road towards the town entrance, the architecture of the buildings and the clothing of the people on the streets looks like something you would see in the 1980s. Kathy stops at the streetlight at the entrance of town, where she can see the town and its inhabitants, which gives a visual that this town has been forgotten in time. A red with white side panels 1987 Chevy pickup truck is stopped at the light in the oncoming lane to the left across the intersection. It is in excellent condition. Kathy then hears the DJ on the radio from the truck announce, "Here it is, the new one from Bon Jovi." The driver of the truck turns up the radio as the light turns green, and he drives by her on his way out of town. The musical tinkle at the beginning of the song Living on a Prayer begins when a car from behind honks and brings Kathy back to reality as she accelerates through the intersection, feeling she has fallen through a time warp. Cautious but curious, Kathy continues down Lincoln Street and finally comes to the address of the antique shop mentioned in the letter. She turns on her left signal, slows down, and pulls into a parking spot in front of the antique shop. Getting out of her car, she takes a look around and cannot believe this entire town looks antique. Opening the door to the shop, an aroma of age and incense, not anything like the exotic candle smells she was used to in places she had been to like this, from inside the store come a-lofting at her. Inside the store, Kathy sees multiple rows of shelves from floor to roof, and they are all crammed, from the bottom shelf to the top, with various antiques. All have tags hanging off of them. From outside, you would not think this many shelves and items would fit into this space. It is as if the store is larger on the inside than on the outside. The main hallway ends at an ancient wood counter about 15 feet away that also has stacks of items on both ends. A few steps before the counter, Kathy pauses and asks out loud, "Hello, is anyone here?" A creak from the wood floorboards and a shut of a door is heard. Kathy again says out loud, "Am I here to—" She is cut off by an old woman who appears from behind the counter and says, "Stop, please, and reach the blue box to your left about eye level." Startled, Kathy looks up at the shelves on the left of the aisle, and between an Egyptian artifact and a deck of playing cards with a ratty purple ribbon around them, there is a bluish-colored box that amazingly has her name on the tag that is attached to it. Confused and scared, Kathy looks blankly at the old lady behind the counter. The old woman says, "Go ahead and bring the box to me over here, dear, and don't worry, because everything is okay." Kathy realizes the box's color is the specific blue color as her favorite color and the color she wants to paint her nursery for her child. Kathy asks, "Who decided on this box for me? Specifically, the color of the box." "That would have been your mother. She always liked that color, and she explained to me when we met that she was told it always complemented her eye color." The old woman answers without looking up as she appears to be writing something in a book on the counter.
To be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles Podcast. Attention Shade Chronicle Podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles Podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming. Previously on the Shade Chronicles. Ananya, I want to be very clear now. Your parents have given us permission to have you assist us in the mission I spoke to you about in your room. I have explained the nature of the mission and tried to impart to you the importance of us working together. It is imperative that you cooperate to the best of your abilities for the rest of our time together. We cannot have any more dissent or hesitation in your willingness to help us. He flipped vigorously through the pages of the clipboard, hoping to discover an answer to his questions that he may have overlooked previously. He was about to go on with his rant when he noticed Ananya was awake. Instead, he addressed her. "You nearly missed your first helicopter ride, Ananya. We have almost arrived at our destination. "Oh, I guess I was pretty tired," she replied sheepishly. Her mind was rewinding back through everything she had heard the men discussing about her. So Dr. Clark lied about the gifts he claimed she possessed, the reason he told her they had come to get her in the first place. She wondered what else he was lying about, if there was really anything special about her. She was also very freaked out about this alien choosing her over everyone else. "When we land, we will need to run a few more tests, and then we will move on to the next stage of our mission. Is that when I will meet the alien?" she asked. "Let's just say visitor." The Visitor by Lawrence Trokey, Part 3. The Chinook drifted gracefully down to the landing area marked off for it in the field. The tall grass in the field whipped around from the wash of the Chinook's large rotors as the landing gear gently touched down. Barely audible over the sound of the massive engines were the landing gear's shock absorbers that sighed as they cushioned the landing for the Chinook's passengers. Ananya exited the helicopter after Dr. Clark and Dr. Liu. The female soldier dropped in behind her in line as the group walked across the field to a large tent near a compound of trailers and military vehicles. The Chinook's rotors caused Ananya's hair to thrash around her head, obscuring her sight. She pulled her hair away from her face and glanced around at the scenery, which was dramatic and lovely. They landed on a field that was surrounded by the Dolomite mountain range. Dr. Clark's frustration at the number of unknowns surrounding Ananya and her role in what was about to unfold had him order his staff, upon landing, to unleash another battery of tests on Ananya. When that was complete, they took Ananya to a laboratory to be fitted with a bodysuit which had sensors wired throughout it. It would keep track of every biological reading imaginable during Ananya's meeting with the visitor. Then they dressed Ananya in her regular clothing, but also augmented her clothes with tiny cameras that could capture every angle around her, almost a 360-degree view of what was going on around Ananya wherever she was. Lastly, they gave her a pair of safety goggles tinted to protect from bright flashes and UV rays, along with a filtered breathing mask and protective gloves. She felt a bit weighed down and insulated from the world in all the gear, but the doctor insisted it was necessary for her own protection. Finally, everyone cleared out of the laboratory except for Dr. Clark and Ananya. He asked her to sit down, and he sat opposite her a few feet away. "So here we are at the moment of truth," he said, and smiled hopefully to reassure her about everything happening and what was to come. "Ananya, I want you to know your safety is our most important priority here. We have taken every precaution, analyzed every contingency in order to make this mission you are about to undertake as safe as possible for you. These people we are working with are the best in the world at what they do. Highly trained specialists who have been working on this project in anticipation of a moment like this for decades. Still, I will not lie to you and tell you there is no risk here. There are unknowns we could not anticipate, but they are mitigated by the level of preparation and training. Just as the first astronauts were well trained for their mission to space and the moon, they still had to accept a portion of risk to take on and complete their missions. However, the benefits of completing the mission far outweigh the risk they faced. You too must accept a level of uncertainty now, but you have no reason to be afraid because you are not alone in this. We will be with you the whole time. I also want to remind you of the significance of what you're about to do. You are establishing contact with an entity from another world far more advanced than ours. This meeting will change our world forever. It could potentially cause mankind to leap forward generations in our own development as a race. We could be seeing the end of war, the end of famine and suffering, the end of death itself, perhaps, depending on the exchange of knowledge and technology we're about to start with our visitor friend. Your role in this endeavor will be remembered in the annals of history, and you will be the hero of the story when it's told. I do not say this to upset you or put pressure on you. I want to be clear about what is happening right now. Do you have any questions? He finished his remarks and leaned back in his chair. Ananya looked at the floor for a moment and then at Dr. Clark. No, I understand. I'm ready to begin. The military jeep drove to the gate of the security entrance. The driver flashed an ID and submitted his face for a retinal scan before the heavily armed guard gave the jeep clearance to proceed through the gate. Inside the jeep, Ananya sat next to Dr. Clark while Lieutenant Mitchell, the female soldier traveling with Ananya for most of her trip, sat in the front passenger seat next to the driver. The jeep pulled up to another security checkpoint, but this time the driver parked the jeep and everyone got out. There was a small wooded area off to Ananya's left, and in front of her stood the mighty Dolomite mountain range. Ananya felt as though she could reach out and touch the tops of the mountains, so clear was her view of them. She had never seen mountains this close before, and the view was breathtaking. Dr. Clark motioned for her to walk to a tent next to the wooded area, and she complied. In the tent, the technicians went over the equipment once more to make sure they were monitoring Ananya's every possible biological function, along with checking the cameras and communication system. Ananya, from here we will be able to monitor your every move. With this earbud, he held up the device for her inspection, we will be able to communicate with you. Try it on. Dr. Clark gave Ananya the earpiece and she put it in her ear. One of the technicians said, "Com check, this is home base. Are you reading me, Ananya?" She heard the voice in her ear and nodded her head. The tech said, "I need you to say something so I can check if I can hear you back." "Oh, sorry, yes, I hear you," Ananya answered. "Comms are good. We're all set, Dr. Clark." "Very good. Please follow me, Ananya." Dr. Clark motioned for her to exit the tent and follow him. They walked away from the tent towards the mountains. The grade of the ground started to rise quickly, and Ananya had to work at keeping pace with Dr. Clark. While significantly older than her, he seemed like a man possessed at this point, determined to start the mission and fulfill his destiny. After a moment, he stopped and looked at her. "Ananya, this is as far as I'm allowed to go with you. From here, you will continue this path for several meters in this direction, and then you will meet with the visitor." He pointed to the path so she could see where to go. "Do you have any questions before we begin?" Thousands of questions filled her head, but she knew none of them would matter until she met the visitor, as Dr. Clark called him. Then one occurred to her that did matter, and she asked, "Will I be able to see my mother after this is over?" Dr. Clark smiled, but his eyes told another story. He wanted to tell her yes, she would see her mother again. He wanted to tell her everything was going to be just fine and that things would go back to the way they were before they met. In truth, he had no idea what would happen next. He did not know what the meeting with the alien might do to her, or if it would possibly change her in some way. He did not know if she would even survive this meeting, if it meant potentially sacrificing Ananya on the chance of establishing a relationship with an advanced alien civilization with the promise of improving mankind's own existence in the universe. He was willing to do so. The stakes for mankind were just too high to play it safe. "Everything will be just fine, dear. Let's focus on the task at hand first, shall we?" He stepped aside to offer her a clear path to what lies ahead. Realizing she would not get an answer to her question, she turned from Dr. Clark and started up the trail towards the mountains. She walked just over 100 meters up the gradually increasing slope when she had to stop for a break. The air was starting to get a little thin, and she was feeling a bit fatigued. Dr. Clark was suddenly speaking in her ear, saying, "We don't want to keep our guest waiting, dear. Please continue up the hill." Ananya rolled her eyes at this and started walking again. She came to the edge of the wooded area that separated the foothills from the mountains. She couldn't see far into the dense forest area, but the path she was on clearly went straight into the heart of it. As she came closer, she felt a wave of static electricity pass over her, making her hair on her arms stand up and even lifting some of her hair on her head. Then it was gone. She hesitated to move again, but she knew Dr. Clark would chastise her if she did not. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the wooded area. The light dimmed considerably in the trees, more than she realized it would, which started to concern her. After a minute, her eyes adjusted to the new level of light and she could see things better. Dr. Clark chimed in. "Ananya, you should be closing in on the visitor's location. Do you see it yet?" Ananya wasn't sure what to look for. Dr. Clark was not very detailed about what to expect when meeting the visitor. She scanned the forest around her, but nothing suggested anyone was waiting there for her. "Not yet," was all she could report. "Very well. It shouldn't be long. You are doing well. No need to be afraid." Just then, Dr. Clark's transmission was cut off. Ananya stopped and waited to see if something would happen. She listened to the sounds of the forest, trying to discern if someone was there, maybe hiding behind a tree watching her. She was starting to get anxious about this whole thing. Her breathing was becoming more intense, and she was perspiring, even though the weather was cool and dry. She turned around and started back the way she came when Ananya was no longer standing in the forest. She had to blink several times to clearly see her new surroundings. She was standing in an empty room. The walls, the ceiling, the floor were all the same color, a light purple hue. The room was not very big, but it was not too small either, maybe the same size as her bedroom back home. Then, for some reason, the room became her bedroom. The scenery changed instantly to that of her bedroom. She was sitting on her bed with no idea how she got there. She started to feel queasy and a bit lightheaded when her mother came into her room. "Ananya," she said in that way mothers call their children when they want their attention, sweetly but with an undertone of authority. "Are you awake, child?" "Mama?" Ananya responded, both questioning how this could be and also relieved to see her mother again. "Oh, good, I wanted to talk to you. I am glad you are awake." Her mother sat down next to her on her bed. Before she could say why she was there, Ananya grabbed her in a big bear hug. Her mother laughed in delight and said, "I am happy to see you too, child. Oh my, you are going to squeeze the life out of me." She laughed some more as Ananya released her grip. Her mother took her hand and smiled at her warmly. She raised her other hand and gently wiped away the tears that were forming on Ananya's cheeks. "Now, there. Everything is all right. No need to be upset. You are safe now." "But how? How did I get here? What happened to you with the soldiers Dr. Clark left with you? Where is Reginald? They said he was coming home to be with you." "So many questions. Let me start by saying you are safe. You are no longer with Dr. Clark or the soldiers. They cannot find you while you are here with me. All of their devices I have rendered inactive, so they cannot hear or see us." At this, Ananya realized she was not really with her mother. She was meeting with the visitor now. "You're not my mother," Ananya said softly. She slowly pulled away her hand that was being held. The hope that this experience was some terrible dream she was waking from was now fading, and the reality of her situation was sinking in. "No, child, I am not. But you are still safe and have no need to fear. I will let nothing harm you, and I am not someone you should fear. I will explain, but first I must ask you something. May I?" Her mother, or the thing pretending to be her mother, stood up from the bed and gave Ananya some space. Ananya nodded her head in response. "What do you remember of your father?" The question took Ananya off guard. While he was always in her thoughts, she rarely spoke of him aloud. To do so was just too painful. She missed him, and she carried that sadness with her every day since her mother and her left India. She struggled to find words, let alone memories, that she felt she could speak aloud. "I know this is painful for you to discuss. I ask this because I need to know so I can explain why I am here and why I asked for you specifically. Please tell me what you remember of him." The visitor's voice, being spoken through the image of Ananya's mother, was gentle and calm. "I remember he was a kind man," she was finally able to say aloud, fighting back her emotions. "He was always smiling. I felt so happy just being near him." Tears flowed down her cheek, but her voice grew stronger, and the more she spoke about her father, the more she wanted to reveal about him. She suddenly was eager to talk about him. It felt good to do so, and the more she spoke, a terrible burden she had carried for a long time seemed to ease. "He took me once with him to a local store to buy mutai in time for the Festival of Lights, Diwali. While we were shopping, I saw a beautiful dress and I fell in love with it. He saw me staring at the dress the whole time while we walked through the store. I don't know how he managed it, but he bought me that dress without me realizing it. When he surprised me with it at home, I was so happy I gave him a hug and I told him I would never let go. That made him laugh hard. My mother laughed too, although she was not happy with him for doing so. We were very poor and the dress was rather expensive. He gave my mother a kiss on the cheek and told her it would all be all right. That is a wonderful memory, Ananya. It tells me a lot about your father and how you felt about him." The visitor smiled at Ananya. "Ananya, what if I told you that you could see your father again? Would that make you happy?" Stunned at the question, Ananya didn't know how to respond at first. Normally, she would have dismissed the idea, but in her present circumstance, meeting with a being she had no concept or understanding of Could it really be possible? Her mind spun at the possibility. Well, of course I would. But how? She wasn't sure how to respond to the visitor's extraordinary proposition. Ananya, I know you don't understand how this is possible, so what I tell you now might seem quite absurd. Human understanding of the universe is considerable and growing, but it is still quite limited. Your people have not traveled the stars and seen what civilizations that are as ancient as the universe itself have conceived and made reality. What seems unimaginable to you is not so impossible after all, and is most likely in actuality somewhere in existence. Ananya was focused on what the visitor was saying and barely noticed as its form began to change. Slowly, as it spoke, the likeness of Ananya's mother melted away and was replaced by a different figure, a male figure. It took Ananya several seconds to realize the visitor's new appearance was that of her father. I sense your confusion, but this time I appear as I really am. Ananya, I am your father. She froze in place at this revelation. All of her faculties just stopped working at that moment. Had Dr. Clark been able to monitor Ananya's life functions, he would have been concerned at the data. The visitor slowly approached Ananya and gently took her into his embrace. On instinct, she responded in kind and let him draw her close to him. Her senses returned to her, with her sense of smell being first. She noticed he smelled like she remembered her father did. Quickly, she realized he was telling the truth, and her hug became more intense. She started to cry hard like she was mourning his loss again for the first time. He gently rubbed her back, letting her release her grief into his chest. A few minutes later, when she started to calm down, he led her to a tree trunk laying on the forest floor and sat her down on it. He sat next to her and took her hand. I know there is much still to explain, and for some of it, you will need to be very brave. I don't have much more time that I can be with you. She tensed up at this, but he gently stroked her hand to put her at ease again. The circumstances that allow me to be here with you are the reason I must make this visit brief. I assure you that you will see me again. When? How long will I have to wait? Ananya just got her father back and did not want to lose him again so quickly. You must be patient and let me finish. It is important that you understand what you will need to do next. Yes, Papa, she answered like she used to so long ago. Good. While you are no longer with Dr. Clark and his people, they have not gone away and will try to find you when they realize you're gone. And they still have your mother under surveillance. You will need to go to her and help her escape. Please understand, Ananya, they will think that you are trying to hide something and will come after you. But you have the means to evade their detection. With this device, you can assume the form of any being on the planet, just as I did earlier when I appeared to you as your mother. He held out a wristband to her that was smooth and had an iridescent color. She couldn't detect a latch or a buckle for the band anywhere on its surface. Then the band magically slithered across her hand and wrapped around her wrist like a snake, where it came together whole again and fit perfectly. Aren't you coming with me, Papa? Ananya was concerned she was not going to see her father again, and she started to get upset. How can I do this without you? He placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Ananya, there is no need to be afraid. I cannot go with you, but that does not mean you will be alone. The device will also allow you to contact me. It is not a radio or a phone. It is something much better, much more powerful than those devices. Besides this, you underestimate what you are capable of, my dear. You are an intelligent and resourceful young woman. You will be just fine. He looked at her, smiling with pride in his eyes. Then a moment later, his smile faded and he took a more serious tone. I realize I put you in this situation. Had I not tried to contact you again, you would have gone on to live a normal life without the troubles I have now caused by being here with you. I am sorry. I could not bear the thought of you being in pain and having to bear the burden of sorrow that you did. I have risked much myself to be here with you. Hopefully you will understand why I did all of this someday. Her father lowered his head. The consequences of his actions weighed heavily on him. Ananya wrapped her arm around him and said, I am glad you did this, no matter what the cost. We will face it together, Papa. be continued next time on the Shade Chronicles. Well, that completes episode 8, and now we're here to talk about the stories that were featured in episode 8. So the first one is by Derek Leftridge, Your Last Bazaar. And Derek, this is a setup of all setups, if anything else. I mean, you're definitely taking us somewhere, and you're getting us all warmed up. You got our tickets in hand, and we're ready to go to whatever destination it is you're taking us to. But we got to wait a little bit before we get there. So why don't you tell us what's going on here? Maybe give us a little bit more explanation about everything.
Sure. The basic part of this story was to kind of, at this point, put time travel and a little bit of mystery together. And that's what I did with the journey of Kathy, who received something in her life she has now that is part of her past, which is from her adopted parents, from her original parents, biological parents. And she's going now to a place to exchange the information for something else that she does not know about. And the area is a place that kind of resembles, the 80s in the sense of back in time. We travel with her. We see her reactions and how she's kind of concerned and things like that. Then we get inside the building.
So let me just pause you here for a second, because there's a couple of things I want to kind of draw out here. So first off, it's important for us to know that this package is from her real parents.
Correct.
Biological parents.
Correct.
Not from anyone else, not adopted parents. And she is adopted. So,
yes.
And this is probably something that happened at a very young age for her. We don't really know exactly, but enough to where she doesn't really know much about her real parents.
You're on the right track, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
So that's mystery number 1.
Correct.
Okay. And then we end up with her driving to this place, even though they're all, her and her husband are kind of wigged out about what's happening, and why is this package here, and who's it really from, and all this kind of stuff. And then she goes to this place, and yeah, it's typical small town, but then there's something else that's weird. It seems like this place is in a time capsule.
Correct.
Everything, is basically thrown back about, 40 years or something like that. And she's seeing it, she's taking it in, but she's not really questioning it that much. I mean, she's at least willing to see what's going on.
Right.
But we as readers or listeners here are like, hey, this is kind of weird. What's, so mystery number 2.
Right. And a lot of that will be explained in part 2.
Sure. But I mean, again, you're building this, you're putting this Jenga thing together that, you're about ready to pull that little key part from us, and we're all going to come tumbling down.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead and continue from there.
Yeah, and then you meet the character that is the older woman that is at the store, and Kathy interacts with her, and then you kind of get the idea that the woman knew she was coming. The woman knows things that she didn't realize, like she knew who her parents were, and the gift is something that's going to be very intricate into the whole story type of thing. So that's where I kind of left it, as the older woman knows where... knows her parents and basically knows Kathy at this point.
Right. Yeah. So, and we just keep adding to the mysteries, right?
Yes,
so we got mystery 3. What's this place that she's going to?
Right.
And who's this old woman, and how does this old woman know so much about her? And then the actual gift itself. What is it? What's it going to be? And how is it going to affect her? So, I mean, again, great setup. Anxious to hear what happens.
I'm leaving
next.
A lot open.
You've just teased us with this, and we're just like, now we got to sit back and wait to see what happens. So, anything else you want to say about it?
No, this is a 2-parter. The second part will be the explanation of all the questions that we have and get us to a really good ending.
Cool. That's great. That's great.
So our other story is Visitor Part 3 by Lawrence Trokey, and I really liked the description of what Ananya is going through being suited up to meet the alien. That was very intriguing and a lot of detail there. And then I just want to mention that if anyone heard the other commentary, that I knew there was something going on with the father. I just had a feeling about the father in the story. I still feel he's very important, but I'm not really understanding exactly what his part is in the story yet. It's getting clearer
because we're already on part 3.
Right.
And just to clarify, this is part 3 of possibly 4.
Or
For
5.
sure 4. Okay.
Or 5.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know when to shut up is the problem.
Now, it's very interesting, and you can go ahead and kind of summarize or whatever you want of that. And I just want to say too that I guess the way we kind of were left at the end of it was with the dad getting Ananya ready to basically go further with what she has to do, and also probably involving the mother.
Yeah,
I assume.
So, kind of stepping back from the details of this story, what is kind of the inspiration for this whole thing was me thinking about existence, okay, and what that means and how it works and all that kind of stuff. And of course, you got religion that tries to explain why we exist and what purpose we have, and there's many forms of explanation if you turn to religion for that. Then you got some philosophical ideas about why we exist and so on. And then you've got just the regular old science that, hey, this Big Bang happened X billion years ago or whatever, and it blew out all this stuff, and then that stuff became more stuff, and then, boom, here we are. So the big overarching idea was thinking about what existence is, what is death, is it permanent, that kind of thing. And with the universe, as much as we know about it now, how big it is, just from our own human perspective, what we've been able to see through various telescopes and other scientific methods, with that idea of how big everything is, the scope of everything, the crazy dimensions of it, we only know just a tiny little portion of what's going on, just what's in our own little corner. And everything else is just stuff we're seeing from afar. So there has to be things that we just can't perceive because we're just too far away. And, for us to be the only intelligent entities in that entire span and space and scope of things just doesn't seem realistic. Now, of course, we haven't seen evidence of anybody else around yet, but that's just because, maybe they're just too far away or there's other reasons anyway. So I know I'm kind of going off into the high grass here, but the point was, in that realm of existence and death and that kind of thing, what if there are other places in the universe that have much deeper knowledge and understanding of how we exist and why we exist and how to manipulate that? And that's where we're kind of going with the understanding of why her father is here.
Right.
He died, but did he really die? Or did he die and because he's from an advanced race, something allowed him to overcome death? That kind of thing. Those are questions still to be answered. But
along with how much does the doctor know and the other people, and what is their connection to all of this? Or
yeah, and probably what we'll find out is the doctor and all of those folks are probably just as much in the dark as we are. They've only got what they know from what they've been able to observe and study over the last 100 years or whatever. And that's why the doctor's so excited about this potential for connecting with this alien. It's like this meeting could advance us by millennia, depending on the information exchange, if we're able to conduct that. So he's super psyched about that. He doesn't really care what happens to anybody in the process.
Right.
Poor Ananya, he's just basically sending her off into the unknown to, hopefully strike up a partnership, but maybe if she gets annihilated in the process, he's like, we'll just start again.
She's very brave. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, right. She's kind of stuck, but she's also like, I want to get back to my mother. And if I can satisfy their curiosity, the scientists' curiosity, and help them, maybe I can get back to a normal life.
Right.
We'll see. That's kind of the big picture, and then the drama of Ananya and being away from her mother, being taken away from her mother, missing her father so much, and then he himself even though he's an alien, he's got these emotions and attachments to her and her mother. So yeah, this is kind of getting us to a point where we start to see what his intentions are and building us up for part 4, which probably will conclude the story.
Right.
Unless, of course, I go off on a tangent, and then we might have to have a part 5. So,
well, I'm looking forward to it. To part 4.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And now here's the little bit of sad news for everyone. To understand all the mysteries of your Last Bazaar, or to find out what's going on with Ananya and her father, you're going to have to wait a few weeks. We're going to be taking a break. We're taking a little summer break. Looks like we'll probably start back up again sometime in September. Still working on a couple of details about when and where, but we will also most likely be dropping a couple of short episodes over the summer, over that break. And they won't necessarily be story-driven. They might feature content from the stories that we've told, but we might also look at other storytellers or other things about this genre that we're operating in, the sci-fi and horror genre and stories from those.
Yeah, and other aspects of podcasting, different type of things like that. Yeah, we'll do a couple of those.
We're still kind of working out the details, but you could possibly count on at least a couple episodes from us over the summer while we're taking this break. And then again, back in the fall, we'll come back with the conclusions to these stories and much more that we've already had plans in place for. So it looks like it's going to be an exciting fall going into winter, and we'll probably wrap up the whole season like we did last year by the end of the year.
Yes, sounds good.
There you go. So for the Shade Chronicles podcast, I'm Lawrence Trokey.
I'm Derek Leftridge.
We appreciate you listening and hope you enjoy our stories. Feel free to reach out to us and send us your comments or questions or whatever. And in the meantime, have a great summer.
Have a good summer.
Take care. Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles Podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. Stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.